All right. So tonight, as we get started, typically start off with a question. So for tonight, is there anybody who's here tonight, man, you've been praying for something? I don't know what it is, but something. Or maybe you've been asking God specifically for a miracle in your life and the life of someone that you love. You've really been praying and asking and believing that God is going to work, but He hasn't answered your prayer yet. Is anyone in that situation, in that category tonight? I actually want you to raise your hands. If you're praying for something, asking God for something, believing in God for something, but He hasn't done it yet. Okay, good. What I want to do today is I want to talk to those of you that are waiting, right? That are waiting, and this is very personal to me, and I believe it's going to speak to a lot of you. And I want to talk to any of you who may be even a little bit spiritually discouraged. Anyone who may be even a little bit beginning to find it difficult trusting God because you're asking Him to do something and He hasn't. And you're thinking to yourself, why isn't He doing this? Why hasn't God shown up? If I can be real honest with you, sometimes God is frustrating. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. You may be thinking it's way too early in the message to be getting that real. But I'm going to go ahead and get that real with you, that sometimes God is frustrating to me. Not because I don't have faith in Him, but because I do. Because I have faith in God. Because I know what He can do. Because I believe in His power. Because I'm praying and I'm believing and I know He can do this. And sometimes He doesn't. And sometimes that's frustrating because I don't have the mind of God. I don't understand the mysteries of why God does what He does and doesn't do what He doesn't do. And I believe there's many of you that may be there as well. There's something on your heart and you're just seeking God about it. You're asking Him, God, would you heal this person? Would you answer this prayer? Would you provide? Would you show up? Would you do this? I believe you can, but He hasn't. So you keep praying, you keep waiting, and if you can relate to any of that, I want to show you a very, very powerful portion from God's Word that I believe will speak directly to your heart if that's you, and hopefully encourage you while you're waiting. If you're new, we're in the book of Daniel, and today we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 10. In Daniel 10, just for context, remember we said Daniel's an older guy now, right? Daniel's looking a little bit like Mike Tyson when he went out there and tried to fight. He's looking old. You can tell he's not what he used to be. He's an older guy now, right? In fact, Daniel's actually closer to 84 or 90 years old, and so his legs are wobbly. He's looking weak. And he's an older guy, and we see him have a vision. And I'll show you this vision in Daniel chapter 10. Starting in verse 1, Daniel says this: In the 3rd year of the reign of King Cyrus of Persia, Daniel, also known as Belteshazzar, had another vision. He understood that the vision concerned events certain to happen in the future, times of war and great hardship. Daniel says, when this vision came to me, I, Daniel, had been in mourning for 3 whole weeks. All that time I had eaten no rich food, no meat or wine crossed my lips. I used no fragrant lotions until those 3 weeks had passed. What is going on here? So if you remember, years and years ago when Daniel was still young, King Nebuchadnezzar, okay, there are a few of you remember. All right, if you've been here, you know what we're doing, all of you together. King Nebuchadnezzar, right, the evil king of Babylon, right, and if you remember, he had conquered Judah in 597 BC, and he captured the best and the brightest young men, and he took them out of Judah, out of Jerusalem, right, their homeland, and he began indoctrinating them with this kind of evil Babylonian culture. And one of those young men that he captured was Daniel. And so here we are, 70 years later now, and the king named Cyrus comes from Persia, and conquers Babylon. So it's a little bit like if you got a little fish swimming along, right? This is Jerusalem, then a bigger fish comes, and that's Babylon, and eats that fish. But now Persia comes along, and they're an even bigger fish, and they conquer Babylon. That's what we got going on here. And so this is kind of good news for the Jewish people. Because the king of Persia, Cyrus, he came in and he said the Jews can now return back to their homeland. He said you can go back to Jerusalem, you can rebuild the temple. So this would have been really, really good news for Daniel. And so while Daniel's happy about that, he's also really concerned because the people of Israel are continuing to sin against God. And so what do you do when you're concerned? Right, well, Daniel, we'll see what he did. And what he did was what we see all throughout the New Testament. And what we're taught to do is to fast and to pray and to seek the God of heaven. And so for 3 weeks, that's what he's been doing. He was denying himself certain things to pursue God greater. He was fasting and he was praying. And it was in this time that he had a vision of some of the things that were to come. And these things were bad stuff. Now I want you to notice that Daniel was deeply moved by God. He was very, very close to God, and because of that, he was very spiritually sensitive. And in fact, I can tell you, in my own life, I can almost always tell how close to God I am or not by what moves my heart, right? By the state that my mind is in. Right? In other words, when I'm not kind of leaning into God, when I'm not really seeking him like at my most, and I'm not making him my first priority and pursuing him with all of my heart, I get upset about little things that shouldn't throw me off. Right? It can just be a slow car in front of me and it ruins my day. Or I get upset about little things like we're out of bug spray, but I've got ants all over the place. That's what happens when I'm not close to God. I get really messed up about really dumb things. But when I'm close to God, I'm bothered by other things. I'm bothered when I see people that are hurting. I'm bothered when I see the brokenness in the church and brokenness in our schools. I'm bothered when I see division. I'm bothered when I see people with so much potential being lazy and wasting their life away. When I'm not close to God, the things that matter most don't really bother me as much. Instead, it's the little things that don't matter. But here we see Daniel was close to God, and he was burdened about the important stuff. He's burdened about the people's heart and their relationship with God. And so what does he do about it? Well, Daniel doesn't worry about it. He doesn't complain about it. He doesn't stay up until 2 a.m. just like plotting, like, what am I going to do about it? Like, no, he sought God. In fact, he sought God for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, he's fasting, he's praying, he's mourning, and then we're going to see him on the bank of the Tigris River. He's got some other people around him, and he sees this vision. And I want you to see what happens when we go back to the text in just a second. Watch what happens. Because Daniel sees this vision, and the people that were with him don't. And so in verse 5, if we pick back up, Daniel 10, it says this. It says, I looked up and saw a man dressed in linen clothing with a belt of pure gold around his waist. His body looked like a precious gem. His face flashed like lightning and his eyes flamed like torches. His arms and feet shone like polished bronze, and his voice roared like a vast multitude of people. Then here's what he says in verse 7. He says, only I, Daniel, saw this vision. The men with me saw nothing, but they were suddenly terrified and ran away to hide. So I was left there all alone to see this amazing vision. So if you can imagine, Daniel's there and he sees this vision, and Daniel's just like, and maybe his friends see Daniel acting strange, and so they get scared and run off. Maybe they just feel something is changing, and so they leave, but they run off, and Daniel's the only one left there to see this vision. And so who is the man that he sees? Who was he? Well, we believe it was one of two people, right? It was either Jesus or it was an archangel. And scholars kind of debate on who it was. And if it was Jesus, which many people believe that it was, this would have been what we call, and does anyone remember the word from a couple weeks ago, last week? The theological term that starts with Christ and ends with ophany? Yeah, Christophany, right? Good job, guys. You all remember. So what is a Christophany? Right? It's an Old Testament appearance of Jesus. Because remember, Jesus was born at the beginning of the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, there can be appearances of Jesus because God is a Trinity. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit. Jesus has always been there. He just didn't become flesh until God sent him into earth. And so many people think this might be a pre-incarnate Christ or either a high-ranking angel. Either way, what we know is this. This is an angelic being. In verse 7 tells us Daniel was the only one who saw this vision. The people with him didn't see it. And this is powerful because this is what's going to happen tonight. This is what is literally happening at this moment for some of you in this room. God has something special for Daniel, just for him. It wasn't meant for the other people. Maybe they weren't prepared for it. Maybe they didn't have the faith for it. Maybe they just weren't there for it. But in the very same way, I believe that God has something special for some of you today. And you're going to experience him in a very rich way. It might be that some of you, like maybe it's already happened. Maybe it was while we were singing and worshiping God. You just sensed his presence here with you. Maybe he just brought this divine comfort to you. You were upset and anxious, but you came in here and worshiped and something's changed. Or it might have been like he was just speaking to you in that moment. It could have been that this morning you opened up the Bible app, you saw the verse of the day, and you knew that was exactly for me. Like that's from heaven for me, not the millions of other people that are reading this. Or maybe it's something that I'll say tonight in this message. It may be something I'm not even planning to say that God's going to prompt me to say, not for the other 50-something people here, but just for you. It may be something special for you, just for you, that other people won't understand. But I believe that for some of you tonight, God's going to speak to you in a very, very personal way. And you're going to experience his presence like a word from God just for you. But at the same time, I believe you're sitting next to people, in front of people, behind people who are going to hear the same things in worship, hear the same things from this message. They're going to see the same things, but they're just kicked back, waiting for it to be over, thinking about where we're going to go for dinner. Meanwhile, you are in the presence of God. And I'm not even saying that in like a demeaning way. Like, I hope you do enjoy your dinner tonight. Like, I hope it's good. I hope I do finish on time and get you on your way. But the person sitting next to you that's daydreaming about Chick-fil-A or Zaxby's may miss out on the presence of God. But at the same time, you may experience God in a very, very real way. This is what we see from Daniel. This is what Daniel says whenever God reveals himself in verse 8. Daniel says, "My strength left me. My face grew deathly pale, and I felt very weak." So he's in the presence of this angelic being, possibly Christ. And he says this in verse 9. He goes on and he says, "Then I heard the man speak. And when I heard the sound of his voice, I fainted and lay there with my face to the ground." This is powerful stuff. He's in the presence of this being and he is face down. He can't even stand. His strength has left him. You say, okay, well, why is this important? It's important because even the strongest of us cannot bear the weight of the glory of God when we're met with it face to face. In the presence of this being, his strength leaves him and he just falls face down to the ground. So I would ask you, have you ever experienced God in that kind of way? Have you ever experienced God in a way that you're just overwhelmed by him? That you just can't stand, you can't think, all you know to do is just fall down and worship him? Have you ever come to a place where you've met God in such a real way that you are just overwhelmed by him? This is Daniel. He's on his face before God. Daniel says this in verse 10. He says, just then a hand touched me and lifted me, still trembling, to my hands and knees. And the man said to me, Daniel, you are very precious to God. God is so holy, and God is so good, and God is so kind. Don't miss this. Daniel's fasting, and he's praying, and now he's afraid, and he's burdened, and he's overwhelmed, and it says, then a hand from heaven touched me. It says, it lifted me and said, you are very precious to God. I love that. I love that the hand that lifted him, right? God lifted him up. Our God is a lifter, right? God's a lifter. Some of you are down today. Life has beaten you down. Worries and anxieties have got you worn down. Well, our God is a lifter. King David, when he was running for his life, said this in Psalm 3. He says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. God is a lifter. God is the one who lifts your head. God lifts those that he loves, and God loves you. You are very precious to God. And so if you're down today, his presence will lift you. He's a lifter. You are a shield about me, David says. Our God lifts those that he loves. And the voice says, you are precious to God. For some of you today, you will hear from heaven, you'll hear the whisper of the Spirit of God that you are precious to him. You'll hear that and you'll believe it. Meanwhile, the person sitting next to you is distracted by their phone, distracted by other things. You'll hear it. The voice from God telling you that he loves you, telling you that you're precious to him, telling you that he's for you, that he's with you, that he's never left you, that he knows your pain, that he hears the cries of your heart. But the other people around you will miss it. Look at verse 12. This is where it gets even cooler. Verse 12 says, then the angelic being said, don't be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you began to pray for understanding and to humble yourself before God, your request has been heard in heaven. I have come in answer to your prayer. This man says 3 weeks ago you started praying, and now I'm here today as an answer to your prayer. And this should be a word for those of you who I mentioned at the beginning have been praying for a long time. Those of you who have been begging God, seeking him. You've been praying for so long, you just feel stupid at this point. Like, why am I even bothering to pray anymore? Daniel's been doing this for 3 weeks. Most of us give it 3 days and we're done. Here's Daniel. He's been seeking God. God, I've been praying. Right? I don't know if you've been there, but I can tell you I have. Right? God, I'm praying for the salvation of this person. And I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying. And I begin to think, like, man, they're never going to really come to you. Because I've been praying for so long and nothing's changing. I'm going to try to keep praying, but I don't see it. I don't believe it. I don't even know if you're listening anymore because I've been praying for so long. Hopefully, I'm not the only one that can say that I've been there. This angelic being says, since the first day that you began to pray, God heard your prayer. And I know there's someone, and you've been praying for a long time. I want you to know, from the moment you prayed for the very first time, God heard your prayer. Daniel's been praying and fasting. He's hurting, he's afraid, and for 3 weeks he's seen nothing. For 3 weeks he's praying and seeking and nothing. But look, verse 13 says this. The angelic being said, but for 21 days the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia blocked my way. And you say, wait a minute. God sent this being to Daniel, but then there's this war going on in the heavenlies, and this spirit prince has blocked his way. We're going to unpack that, but he keeps saying, he says, then Michael, one of the archangels, came to help me, and I left him there with the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia. There's a lot here. So Daniel's praying, seeking God, and nothing's happening. This angelic being appears to him. He's coming to help. But yet we see there's this spirit prince blocking his way. And so God responds by sending reinforcements, this archangel, because there's this battle going on. Like I said, there's a lot in this verse that is happening right now, but it's one of the greatest pictures that we get in the Old Testament of the spiritual warfare that's going on every single day. Because Paul told us this in Ephesians 6:12. He said, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. In other words, there's a spiritual battle taking place. In other words, when you're praying, there's more going on than your natural eyes can see. When you're praying, God hears you. He's heard your prayer from heaven. And God may have already unleashed the help that is on the way. But maybe there's warfare taking place against the forces of darkness. That's what we see in the life of Daniel. This spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia was blocking the way. You may be asking, what is the kingdom prince of the spirit of Persia? What is that? All right, let's unpack that a little bit, all right? Bible scholars say that this is likely some kind of demonic force, fallen angel, and the archangel, who we know is the protector of God's people, comes in and says, hey, we're here to take you down because the power of God is always greater than the powers of darkness. The reinforcements came in to settle this heavenly battle, and this angelic being, now the man that appeared to Daniel in his vision, is now released. The way is cleared, and he's able to reach Daniel. And I know this seems like a lot, but this should be so powerful for those of you that have been praying and waiting and seeing nothing. Because that was Daniel, praying and seeing nothing. But just because he wasn't seeing anything didn't mean that God wasn't working. Let me say that again, just in case you missed it, because this is important. Just because Daniel hadn't seen anything yet didn't mean that God wasn't working. And that's why there's someone here that this will be an encouragement to you. This should build your faith because you've been praying and you've been waiting. You've been praying and waiting and praying and waiting, and you're not seeing anything. You've been praying and you're still waiting. I want to tell you, if that is you, while you're waiting, God is still working. While you're waiting, God is still working. While you wait, in the heavenly realms, there is a battle taking place. Your battle is not against the people in your life that drive you crazy. Our battle is not against things of this world. We're fighting a battle that goes on beyond the visible eye in the spiritual realm. That's why, as people of faith, we're called not to walk by sight, but by faith. That's why whenever we're weak in our own strength, it's His Spirit that makes us strong. Because we're called to live spiritual lives, not worldly lives. And I'm afraid that today, in our modern world, in our modern churches, we've become so practical, only believing in what we can see and what we can do for ourselves, that we've missed out, we've forgotten about the very spiritual side, the very real warfare that's taking place beyond what our eyes can see. Because maybe you're a lot like Daniel. Maybe there's forces of darkness doing battle. But when you pray, you can have faith that God has heard your prayer from the day that you began to pray, from the first time that you prayed. The first time you prayed, the first time you called out, heaven heard your prayers. And help is on the way. And so Daniel, he's overwhelmed. He's got no strength. He's on his face. And then he's lifted. And this being speaks to him. Verse 18, if we look, says this. Then the one who looked like a man touched me again, and I felt my strength returning. Someone today, again, you're going to feel your spiritual strength returning because maybe you've lost some faith in the waiting, but it's coming back. Maybe you've lost some strength, but God is bringing it back. When you're at your weakest, His strength is made perfect. Daniel says, my strength was returning. And the being says again, don't be afraid, for you are very precious to God. The second time he says, you're precious to God. Because maybe you missed it the first time and you need to hear it a second time. You are precious to God. You need to hear it again. You are precious to God. He cares about you. He hears the cries of your heart. You are precious to God. Peace. Be encouraged. Be strong. Daniel's physically weak. He's worried. He's concerned about his people because they're sinning against God. He's got this burden. And God is doing battle in the heavenly. And God sends a message to him and says, you are precious to me. Have peace. Be encouraged. Be strong. And for those of you that will lean in and listen tonight, not to my words, but to listen for the voice of the Spirit of God, He'll speak to you. He'll speak to you and He will tell you this very same thing, that you are precious to Him. That you're precious to Him, that He cares about you, that He's with you, that He's heard your prayer, and that He's working on your behalf. He'll tell you you can be at peace. Because I can give you a peace that goes beyond our human ability to understand. When you cast your cares on Him, when you cry out to Him, when you're not anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, you take your request to God. There's a peace that goes beyond our ability to understand. And the Spirit of God may tell you today the same thing He spoke to Daniel, which is be encouraged. Be strong. You are precious to God. You're precious to God. So as we begin to close, let's take a step back and review where we've been in this series. How do you live with conviction in a culture of compromise? If you remember, Daniel resolved to be faithful to God no matter what. He had determined, he made up his mind, he would not compromise his values to blend into culture, but that he would honor God with everything that he did. And we said, we do this because you may live in Babylon, but Babylon doesn't have to live in you. You may be in this world, but you do not have to be like it. He distinguished himself. Remember the word Manasseh, right? He stands out. No matter what we do it for the glory of God. No matter what the world says, when we show up with faith, God enters into the room. Hope walks in the room. Light and love walk in the room. And when we do everything by faith, we're not divided. We're not angry and hateful. We speak the truth, but we treat people with love and integrity. And we always show the love of Jesus. When we tell the truth, we do it with love. And we cry out to God, and we believe that He's faithful, and we know that He's faithful. And because we believe He's faithful, we say this, right? We say, God, I believe that you can. God, I believe that you will. But God, even if you don't, I still believe. God, I believe you can. I believe you will. But even if you don't, I still believe. And so today, for those of you that may be feeling spiritually discouraged because you've been praying and you've been waiting and you've been praying and you've been waiting, I get it. I've been there too. And I too have to remind myself that God hears our cries. He knows our heart. And that our faith actually pleases Him. And just because I don't see anything doesn't mean He's not working. God may be speaking to some of you today. Don't be afraid. You're precious to God. God is holy. God is good, and God is kind. And from the very first time that you prayed, He heard your cries in heaven. And He's released angels to go to war against the forces of darkness for you, on your behalf. And I want you to know, and I want you to feel this, and I want you to believe this, that if God is for you, then who can truly be against you? Because greater is he that is in you than he that is in this world. Remember our key verse where we started this whole series in week 1, Daniel 2:28. There is a God in heaven. All of this comes back to that one verse. There is a God in heaven. So no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're experiencing at this very moment, no matter how much pain you're in, no matter how much doubt you may feel, remember that there is a God in heaven. And he hears the cries of our hearts. And while you're waiting, God is working. He's working right now because our God is a good God and he's always faithful. And even when we are faithless, God is still faithful. Because of that, he's worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our lives. He's worthy of our trust. He's worthy of all that we have and all that we are. He's the only one worthy of all of our praise. So tonight, maybe you just need to fall before him. Like Daniel, just on your face before God, because you're just overwhelmed by his glory and his goodness in your life. Or maybe you just need to start by surrendering your life to him, because you've been seeking and finding but never truly feeling satisfied. This life has kind of left you worn out, beaten down, exhausted, tired. Maybe it's time you try something different. Maybe you need to be lifted tonight. Maybe you need your strength to return to you, but there's only one who can, and it is our God in heaven. There is a God in heaven, and he has heard your cries. He knows your heart. So maybe you just need to turn to him, laying your life down, surrendering it all to him. Or maybe you just feel led to stand and worship a God so good, so holy, so worthy of our praise. However God is leading you to respond in this moment, would you do so now before we break off into our family groups in just a moment?